Welcome to the Values Exchange podcast. I'm Mike Cruz, your host, private pilot, author of Saturday Every Day, and CEO of North Texas Wealth Management, a firm dedicated to values-based financial planning. This podcast uncovers the values and habits of highly successful people and dives into how it has shaped their success and what you can learn from their personal stories. Thanks for tuning in again for the Value Exchange podcast. We have a great guest today. Tom Perkowski is with us from the Executive MBA Program, Assistant Dean at SMU, Cox School of Business. And, I had the privilege of attending and getting my MBA there. And my initial interview was with Tom. And he said, why in the world does a certified financial planner want an MBA? And so I just remember him giving me a lot of questions, and here's my turn to question Tom. But a great background, entrepreneur, a professor, an assistant dean for 20 years of the Executive MBA Program, where it was ranked top in the world, and now in retirement as an executive coach. So, Tom, thanks for being here on the Value Exchange podcast.
You're welcome, Mike, and I look forward to this. And clearly, it's really satisfying for me to be able to see what your progress since it's almost 11 years, I think, since I interviewed you, and what you've done in your career. And just that I'm a little piece of that, I feel very good.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. So, all about executive coaching today. So, each value I wanted to focus on executive coaching, and of course, that's what you're doing now, but kind of before we dive in, I think, all these, MBA students, if you were talking to your grandkids and kind of telling them about your legacy, like before you were a part of the MBA program, give me a little bit of history. Like, where'd you grow up? How'd you get there?
Okay, good. And when you look at my LinkedIn profile, the first sort of exclamation is, I like to help people. And in general, when I look back at my career, and as you get older, it's easier for you to look back, you look for some common themes. And the common themes was that I really liked to help people because people helped me when I was growing up and so forth. But now when you think about things like executive coaching, it's a little different from the standpoint of what does it mean? But when I look back at my career, particularly the 20 years with the Executive MBA Program, I feel like that's what I was doing all along. Yes, I was recruiting and making sure that they showed up for class and their grades were what they needed to be. But in a sense, they were all at high levels within their companies and so forth, in their organizations. But what I was helping them do is to ask them questions. Is this what you were looking for? Is this enough? What about your timelines? Are you there? Because I wanted to make sure that they got a good ROI on their education. But even when I look back at my corporate career, where I was the most successful, I feel, and by successful, I was helping people, was in training and development. So we did an internal university at Pearl Vision, which is where I spent 15 years, moved to Dallas to actually start an internal university. And again, going back to why did I like that? Because I was helping people. And then I bought a franchise and ran that for 4 years in Plano. But that's a good example of where maybe coaching would have helped, because I don't think that worked out all that well. And if I would have had someone say, well, Tom, what do you really like to do? Help people. Okay, so then we think you should buy a franchise. Wait a minute, that doesn't seem to be as consistent. So it worked out well, and my connections brought me to SMU. But I think from a coaching perspective, I think the role of an executive coach is to ask the right questions and then keep quiet and allow people to elaborate on what it is they're good at, what they like to do, and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so executive coaching, I think, has kind of been a more recent term. So can you tell me a little bit about like where you think that came from? Yeah. What's the history of executive coaching?
Yeah, and I thought about that. And I thought about that question you were going to ask. And I think it's a relatively recent phenomenon. So when I was growing up and so forth, when you said coach, it was sports. But when you think about what the role of a coach is in sports, is he or she wasn't necessarily the best athlete, but they were the best at counseling, asking questions, looking at how they were performing, and then saying, what do you think? Do you think we should work on this? And I can help you from that standpoint. And executive coaching, I think, and it was in the 90s mostly, but then really by the 2000s, it really, it really flourished. And even the term itself is a little bit confusing because when you say executive coach, does that mean if I'm a manager or I'm a director or I'm not considered on the leadership team, does that mean I don't get executive coaching? So I think in a sense, when people say they're an executive coach, it might be better to almost use I'm a professional coach and I can work with the highest levels of an organization, or I can look at mid-level, et cetera. So it sort of depends. And again, when you're going out looking for a coach, those are the types of questions that you want to ask because it's not a one size fits all. So coaching is relatively new, 20 years, but I think it stems from in the old days when you worked for a company, you didn't have a coach, but you had like a mentor. So like you hired me, so you'd say, Tom, you just stick with me, and if you do everything I do because I'm successful, then you can be just like me. So I said, okay, great, Mike. I think I'd like to do that. And then, 1990s, 2000s, people now started to migrate from company to company. The loyalty wasn't as strong. Executives, moved, et cetera, et cetera. So now, and was HR going to help you with your career? In many cases, their role changed also. So the idea would be what took its place? Well, people who were good at asking questions, determining, what might be a good fit for you and so forth. So this whole executive coaching concept came about. And it's obviously flourished because of good people are in the field.
Mm-hmm. So give me a little bit more background. So you went to Penn State, and what'd you major in there?
Something that was very popular and something that really helped me in my career: political science.
Okay.
So there are a lot of political science majors out there running around my age, probably executive coaches, okay. And sociology majors, things like that. But when I look back, political science was really an opportunity to get an education where I could do a number of things with it. Yeah, you could either teach with it or you could be a researcher, but in many cases, when I was graduating, you had to have a degree. Degrees were the entry point to a lot of positions. And I just happened to find a position that was growing, knowing that as the company grew, I could sort of look around and say, I think I'd like this area or this area from that standpoint. And that seemed to have worked out.
Okay. And then you went back to school, so Dallas Baptist University, to focus on organizational management. What was that program like now that you know what the MBA or Executive MBA looks like at SMU? How is it different?
So in a sense, I got to SMU, and in order to teach, and in order to even be eligible for the role of assistant dean, you needed to have a master's degree.
Okay.
So the motivation was go get a master's degree and so forth. Then you could be in the mix, and that's exactly what happened there. But in a sense, it was a step up from an educational standpoint because now I knew what I wanted, and getting a degree in management helped me both in my role for 20 years at SMU, teaching, and also in my role now as an executive coach.
Yeah. So, and just to look at the scale at SMU, typically somewhere around 100 students per year for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's a huge network. It's amazing. So now that you've retired and you're focused on executive coaching, is that primarily where that network? Are you using that network to find people to coach?
Yeah, so the math is 2,000. So literally between interviewing and then working with students, coaching them for 21 months, that's significant because there are a lot of programs where you're either in the recruiting phase or you might be in the student services. Our program, we were fortunate enough to where all of us did everything. So I would say, hey, Mike, we think the Executive MBA program at Cox would be good for you. And then we would interview, would go through your goal sheets, et cetera, et cetera. And then we would be with you for 21 months. And that's where the coaching came in. So at any time on a Friday or Saturday, you could, and did, reach out to me saying, hey, Tom, I really like this. Or, hey, Tom, I think I need to do this. Can you have some ideas on electives or things like that? I do. Let me ask you a couple questions first. So I felt like that 20 years of experience, that was executive coaching. Maybe we didn't call it that, but that's exactly what it was.
Right. Oh, that's great. So the role of the executive coach, we kind of looked at asking the right questions. Can you give me an example? Like, what are those questions?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest misnomers. And I think that people, sometimes clients, for example, they get a little frustrated sometimes when they work with a coach, maybe for the first time, because they may not know the true role of an executive coach. And the role of a coach is to ask questions. And a lot of times people would say, well, wait a minute, you're asking me a lot of questions. Where's the remedies? You say, well, you've got the remedy. So if you're playing pro ball, if you're a professional basketball player, you have the talent. Now it's a question of what help do you need in order to take the next step. And that really is the role of the coach, would be to say, well, how do we get you to shoot free throws a little better? Or it seems like you lose that first step and the person knows what to do. It's just a question of, how do we put together a plan on helping you to get there? But I think to answer your question, the biggest struggle is that people think that a coach is, well, if I were you, here's what I would do. Or my advice to you, those words really should not come out. It should be more like, in my experience, here's some things that I would maybe put you in. There's some people that I might put you in touch with. Or here, an MBA program might be something you should look into, or maybe just an associate degree is what you want, or go to Harvard for a month and get some training in strategy and things like that. So, but to answer your question about what are some of the questions, tell me about what you'd like to be. So give me the short-term, long-term goals, and then listen, and then ask more questions. Well, what do you consider short-term or long-term? And how difficult will it be in order for you to accomplish that? What kind of timeline are you thinking about? What additional resources do you need in order to accomplish that? And what would be the biggest challenges in order to do that? Well, I'm Dallas-based, I really can't move, or I've got a growing family. So you have people start thinking about what it is as part of their plan and so forth. And that's really what a coach, particularly in the first meeting, that's what they should do.
Yeah, so the guest on my first podcast was James Willis, and he was, talking to me about how he's worked with an executive coach. And he introduced me to him, and I had a brief conversation with him. And one of the things that I brought up was, this particular executive coach said, he goes, Mike, people really know the answer, kind of like what you're saying. He goes, I'm just their permission slip. Like, why don't you go do that? And he just gives them a big shove and kind of that confidence of like, yeah, go do that. Do you find that that's true? That most of the time they just need permission, or is it really that you need to question kind of that thread of thought and say, repeat it back to them where they go, oh, is that really what I'm thinking?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to that relationship, and it goes back to a person who's looking at hiring or engaging an executive coach. Everyone should do an interview and say, well, what are your thoughts? What's your philosophy on executive coaching? Because a lot of times people get the terms confused, coaching versus mentoring. And a lot of times I've seen people come away from mentoring experiences and they say, well, Tom told me that if I were, if this is what you might want to think about doing, because that's what I did. Or if you follow my career. And I don't think that works anymore, because you have different goals, different educational backgrounds, and things like that. So the interview process of finding the right fit, the alignment with what you're looking for, and that's what I would ask you. So I'd say, well, Mike, what can I do for you? Mm-hmm. Okay, and how can I help you? Because some of it may be a little bit confidence building, sort of like the permission slip from that standpoint. Say, why don't you do that? What's holding you back? And that's what I'm saying. Maybe the person doesn't realize what the challenges are or the resources that they need, et cetera. You say, well, why? What's stopping you? Why don't you go out and do that? And then just keep quiet. And again, a good coach is a good listener.
Kind of help them sort out their own thoughts.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And it may not be in the first session. That's why people would say, oh, you're just, how many sessions will this take? I don't know. What's the goal? And how do we measure? And that's part of the whole process of getting a coach would be, how are we going to measure how successful this relationship is? After so many sessions, do we know? Because if someone says, well, based on our interview, I think this will take 8 sessions. What? How does someone know that?
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. So you kind of have to just kind of dive in and then go, we're going to keep working until you get what you want.
And if you have the right interview and you think like you have the right person, then you're not concerned about someone saying, well, I think it's going to be about 12 sessions, and then people, I'm not sure I'd trust someone who said right at the bat, it's 12 sessions,
right,
and so forth. So we're going to meet whether we need to or not. So,
what is that average length of time when you start working with an executive coach? Is there, like, you get to it in 3 months and sometimes it takes 2 years, or what would somebody expect if they hired an executive coach?
Again, depending on what the goals are and so forth, and then the measurement part of it. So if you said that what I don't seem to be very good at is hiring the right people. The people on my teams, somehow that's not working out really well. I think I need to do a better job, particularly with our C-level people, of interviewing. Okay, so what do we need to do? If the coach, that happens to be part of their skill set, then they can work with them, or they find a resource in order for that to happen. Now, will the person be doing some interviewing over the next couple of months? Well, you can determine in many cases whether that was valuable, the skills and the plan, if they hired some people and they hung around. But you don't necessarily have to be meeting all that time. You say, let's give this a 6-month period. You've got 3 people to hire on your management team. After 3 months or 6 months, let's do a little, let's have another chat and so forth, and see how that's going. So there could be little hiatuses between those sessions and so forth. So it's more like it's evolving. And I think it's like meetings in corporation. Right. We're going to meet Monday at 10 o'clock, regardless of whether we need to or not. So no, do we need to meet this week? Yeah. No, we don't. Okay, great. Then in 2 weeks, we'll have more to discuss and so forth. So it's fluid. It's probably the best.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So you had mentioned this LPI program. Tell me, what does it stand for? What is it?
Yeah. So it's a leadership practices inventory. And the authors have been around for like 40 years and so forth. And they've done a lot of research, and they teach it to some of the best schools. But I think assessments in general, LPI being one of them, I think it's necessary because I've worked with some clients where they would say, well, you know what, you need to work with Mike because he's pretty offensive. And, people seem to, shy away from his management style and so forth. You say, okay, so Mike, you feel that way? Not really. And who would say that, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of having a 360-degree assessment where you go out and you do a self-assessment of what you feel your strengths are as a manager, or the frequency. So if you feel like you always are motivating or always inspirational, then you rank yourself with different questions. But then you ask like your manager to do the same thing.
Okay.
And then you ask maybe you asked your direct reports, and it's anonymous. And so forth. And then you would ask some people that maybe you work with, like coworkers. Then you get a report and you see how you evaluated yourself on those leadership practices or behaviors. How did your manager feel about that? And was there a gap? a significant gap? Why is that, et cetera, et cetera? What about the people that report to you? And again, it'll be anonymous. So if you find that everyone seems to be consistent with your assessment except for one, then you wouldn't know who that was, but you'd say, well, who do you think in general may have said those things about you because you struggle maybe with one person or another? So the idea would be to have something to work on. So if you just said that people find you offensive, so what does that mean? From that standpoint, does everyone feel that way? Well, they'd put it in the assessment because then they could also put some comments in there and so forth. But then you also want to find that maybe you're good with your manager, not so good with your direct reports, and then people who work with you or coworkers. It's all over the board and so forth. So that would say, okay, so what are we going to work on, Mike? What should we tackle first? So that provides some ammunition for putting together a plan. And then you can do like a reassessment after 6 months. You could do something internally where you then ask people, you would ask during the assessment, you would ask, what should Mike start doing? What should Mike stop doing? And then by the time you have completed and maybe you have a business plan, you ask the same question again. Has Mike made progress, et cetera? And again, it would be anonymous, but they would say, is your score improving? Did everyone quit as a result of that? So clearly that wasn't the right plan. But I think you have to have some form of measurement up front, and then you measure it at a period.
So you can see the progress.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's valuable because there's kind of no reality, only perception, right? And so you may perceive yourself as, oh, I'm a great boss. Everybody, is super motivated. And then you do an assessment like that, and maybe there's a disconnect and you can address it. Whereas if you're just ignorant of it, ultimately the business may fail, right? I mean, you may be driving things to the ground, not even aware of it.
Yeah, and the thing is, but people would have to be open to this because clearly some people don't like the idea that they're being evaluated. So I think the whole point when you would work in an organization where you would use an assessment like this, you'd have to make sure up front that they know it's clearly anonymous, but that it's part of the leadership development plan, which includes everyone. Okay. Because now everyone would do the instrument, and then you might say, "Hey, Tom, it looks like in these leadership behaviors, you both see yourself pretty high, but then others, both people that work with you, they also see you as a potential leader. Have you ever thought about that? We've got a leadership development plan, and we can probably put you in that. We still look at a timeline, so they can't." The people that are filling out the instrument for your sake, for example, they can't feel like they're outside. They have to be part of the plan or part of the improvement or development plan. What's in it for me?
Yeah. So you get that perspective and you can take that and run with it. So that's great. Can you, I know there's confidentiality with coaching, but can you think of a kind of a success story where you've worked with somebody and it was a successful outcome? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I'm working with an organization right now where the entire sort of IT department, actually the person who is the CEO of this company happens to be a graduate of the Executive MBA Program, and so forth. And he brought me in and he asked me to work with some of his people in the IT department and so forth. So this is prior to the LPI instrument. Okay. And this is why this is a learning for me, and that's why I wanted to make sure that I had an instrument, an assessment that I could use moving forward. But a lot of times when I was working with some of the staff, it was, well, tell me how I can help you. They really weren't sure how they could, because they really didn't know, other than what somebody said about them, how they could help. And sometimes people look at coaching as, what did I do wrong? Well, is it only me that's getting coaching? Right. Am I going to get fired here? Sure. And the answer is, again, it's like, how do you present it? And so forth. So you have to present it in a positive way. It's part of the leadership development program. And once we got over that and so forth, it was better. And now, by the way, now that I have this instrument and I've been certified in this, I'm now going back with that company because my relationship continued. I'm now going to have every one of those participants complete the assessment. So now we'll go back and what did we accomplish? Oh, we got this right. Here's some new things that came up. How are we going to deal with that? I think it's going to be a lot more effective, and we're going to be able to measure it. Because doing internal assessments and things like that may not work all that well. But if you have something formal, it'll be better.
Oh, that sounds fun.
And Mike, one thing I wanted to share with you, actually I knew you were going to ask that question, and that is, so of the 2,000 people that we talked about that went through the Executive MBA program, and clearly, I have to say this, and I've told you this before, like you were probably one of the most prepared people to ever do the program. And I remember meeting you, and I know this is not supposed to be, all hail to Mike here, but you came to the session, my first session, and said he had a PowerPoint. You had a PowerPoint presentation. Remember that? These are my goals. These are things that I want to accomplish. So in a sense, somebody might say, well, he doesn't need coaching, but I think you did, maybe not as much, but again, a check-in. Hey, Mike, how's the program going? It looks like, how's that accounting class going? How's that strategy class going? Mm-hmm. By the way, let's revisit those goals. How's it going? Et cetera. So I look at 20 years of that. Some people obviously need more than others, but it was a coaching session. What was the measurement? Grades, promotions, graduation? All those things were measurements as to how people, they had goals, they were paying for them. Now it's a question of did they achieve them? And it's really great now, after leaving the program and 20 years, to be able to talk to people like you and others and see how successful they've been.
Well, that means a lot. I appreciate that, because I got to tell you, it was an interesting experience going through the program in that, I was a certified financial planner. I was kind of in the thick of, business, and I thought I was really, really prepared. It was so humbling being in the program. I realized that, I was in there with the chess champion in India, mechanical engineers, and there was like zero math that these guys couldn't just ace. Right. And I looked around and I went, man, I am out of my league. And so that was my perspective of it. It was a super humbling experience. Very, very bright, smart people. And I was like, what am I doing here? And maybe that question of like, why does a financial planner want to be in this MBA program was a really good question from the beginning. And I had to look back at like, why did I want an MBA, and remind myself like why I'm here and what I wanted to get out of it. And networking connections was a big part of that, because I was in a small business and I felt like I wasn't in the community. And so, really this podcast is kind of the continuation of that. But I appreciate that, because it didn't feel that way.
and I would respond to that too, is that you don't want to be this in an MBA program in particular, an executive MBA program. You don't want to be the smartest person in the room, because the thing is, you don't want to be, because the idea would be, well, tell me about some of your classmates. Yeah. Chess champion, this person is running this, et cetera, et cetera. You want that, because in a sense, everyone should have in their career like a board of directors. And I think I've shared this with you before, where maybe one of the board members could be an executive coach. But then there are also some people that may know you from your church, they know you from another aspect of your life, where you're about to make a career decision or a business decision, and you call a board meeting, or you do it individually, and you talk to your coach about, I'm about ready to buy this franchise. Do you think that's a good idea for me? Well, Tom, let me ask you a couple questions. Then you go to someone who may have been a franchise owner before, and you talk to them. But you have a board meeting, and you should always be able to bounce things off people. You don't want them to give you the answer. And when they say, well, I did it this way, that's great. Thank you for your response. Yeah. So you want people to ask you more questions about, is that important? Does it fit into, your career themes, your value themes? Does it fit in? And if it doesn't, then maybe you shouldn't do it. But It's still your decision.
Right. How often does that all lead back to the psychology of things? Like, okay, at the end of the day, time out. Yes, you could go down this whole path, but what makes you happy, and what do you want out of life? Does it go down the path of psychology, or do you try to steer clear of that?
No, I think the idea of, and part of being an executive coach is you clearly have to be a little bit of a psychologist, from the standpoint of, you have to know something about psychology and what motivates people. Because again, the idea of saying, well, you should do this, or everyone should do this, or assuming everyone is motivated by this, it's obviously incorrect. So that's why the questions. So what makes you happy? What wakes you up in the morning? What do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I can do the same thing with myself and say, but when looking back at a 40-year career, what are the things, when were you the most happy? When did you feel like you were the most productive, et cetera? And that helps me now in my retirement and also in some of the work that I do as a volunteer and so forth. So it's still, I'm actually helping 8th grade students prepare for interviews for high school. And I'm a mentor. So I'm a coach even with, with kids, that are 14, 15 years old. But it goes back to what are the themes or the values in your life? Helping people get better and achieve their goals. And really, it's really come back. And I've gotten, it's reciprocal. So people continue to help me, like you, bringing me in to, do this podcast. So.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's neat. So advice for somebody looking to find a coach. I don't know much about the executive coaching industry or their organizations. If I wanted to go out there and, for example, you want to find a financial planner, you can go look for a certified financial planner and go to the organization's website and find a financial planner. Is it similar in the executive coaching, or is it a little bit more like, elbow the person next to you and say, hey, do you know any good executive coaches? How is it done?
Yeah, and it actually relates back to what I'm doing with SMU as a career coach. So many people, when they're looking for a job, they do it when they don't have one.
Okay.
So the ideal would be you want to network and you want to meet as many people as possible, and you make deposits with them. Because at some point, maybe in your life, you'll ask for a withdrawal. So if you were looking for a position, I wouldn't reach out to you saying, hey, do you know of any jobs? I would ask you that, one of the options in my career would be to be a financial planner. I just like the idea. It sort of fits into what I'm good at, what I like to do. Can you share some insights with me as to it, or some advice that you might give? And you would give me, you wouldn't say, well, here's what you should do, be like me, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more like, to go back to your question, it would be, if I'm looking for a career coach, if I'm looking for an executive coach, I'm looking for a financial planner. Mm-hmm. I found one because you were in the program. And actually, I also have some investments with another person who happens to be a graduate of the Executive MBA program. If I would be looking, I'm not so sure that I'd probably do the Google thing.
Right.
But to find a good coach is asking maybe people who've had executive coaches, and ask for the pros and the cons. Ask if you were going to do it over again, what would you do? And then ask like 5 people at maybe various levels within their career. Maybe, and some people say that, well, if you want to be an executive coach, then what does that mean? Does that mean that you have to be at a CEO level? Does your company have to be doing $5 billion in sales? I don't know. So you ask a number of people at certain levels, or do they use a coach, not necessarily an executive coach, and what's the value that they bring? And then put together sort of like in your case, put together a plan. You put the asset column and the liability side, and look at it and sort of make a decision. But if you narrow it down, now you have to do some interviews and so forth, and then ask for some of their names of their clients. It's more like that, because you can go to Google right now and put in executive coach, and obviously it's amazing. Where they say, if you're looking to increase your business by 20%, click here.
How do you know if you can believe it?
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So,
let's talk a little bit about just kind of big picture. And that was really my takeaway from the MBA program was I like to look at the big picture, but my teammates, we all did kind of this assessment of each other, and they said, digging really into the details and that execution and something very technical, being able to also, go big picture, but then get very minute. That was something I needed to work on. And, so when we look at the big picture of the industry, kind of the executive coaching industry, I think it's being, obviously developing pretty quickly, and technology is a big component of that. So I just wanted to kind of get your take on where's it headed? Where's it headed in the future? How is technology going to play a role?
And I clearly believe that the increase of using Zoom really, I think, is a plus for executive coaching, because just if you take Dallas-Fort Worth market, if we were going to set up a coaching agreement and we decided, well, where are we going to meet? Well, okay, you want to find someplace in between. When are we going to do it? Is it good for us to spend an hour traveling somewhere to meet, or I'm going to come to your office, etc.? Do we need to do that? Given the fact that what we're really going to do is I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to give me your responses. Then we're going to put together a development plan, etc. That can all be done with Zoom or some form of Teams, some form of technology. And in a sense, if I'm your coach and I have to drive an hour to your office and an hour back, I have to make sure that someone pays for the $3 a gallon gas. So, I hate to sort of narrow it down to that, but in a sense, you'd say, well, why should we do that? I can actually maybe not charge you as much because we don't have to travel from that standpoint. And I'm doing something for another organization, another executive MBA graduate coming up, and they want me to come to their office and sort of paint the big picture as to why they're going to be doing this assessment, et cetera. That makes sense. But then once they do the individual profile, the actual analysis and the feedback that I would give them, that will all be done by way of Zoom. So I think it's a combination of both, but I think your client base now is not limited to Dallas-Fort Worth.
Right.
You could be working with people all over the country.
So virtual executive coaching.
Absolutely.
Really, I think it's more efficient for busy executives and business, and makes sense.
Let's hop on for 15 minutes. Let's hop on for a quick Zoom call and get something coming up, et cetera, et cetera. That's the way it should work.
Mm-hmm. So how would a person know when they need an executive coach?
So good question. And there's a number of ways that organizations handle this. One is if the executive or the decision maker in a company, if he or she decides that coaching is what's needed within the organization, he or she can actually bring someone in as a coach, and they could work with their leadership team, for example, and work with all of them. So it would be, driven by the executive, or individuals can reach out for an executive coach. And of course, the question is, well, how do I know if I need one or when? Well, you look at your career and look at what you're doing, what you would like to do, and are you being recognized within the organization for positions that come available? Or what about your performance reviews and so forth? Is there a development plan as part of your success planning? What do you do? Well, if you don't have a strong human resource department, and human resource departments don't usually have a lot of training and development these days. They've been sort of cut back. So now you say, well, where do I reach out? I think what I need to do is reach out and see, I need some coaching and so forth. And I think a coach that you would actually reach out to can be good because they look at the perspective, it's outside your company. So they'd say, well, okay, so have you been offered these opportunities you feel like that you deserve? Have you been offered them within your organization? No? Okay, well then have you let people know that you'd like to be and what's needed? And if the answer is no to those questions and it continues, that's where a coach would say, have you looked elsewhere?
Yeah.
Or how big is your network? What can you do? And they can help you from that perspective.
Yeah. So there's a pain point. And sometimes it's just giving them the courage to either ask for the raise or pursue the next position. What do they really want? And then there's that hurdle of why can they not get there?
And I really do think that, sort of to finish this off, I really do think that a person in general should have, go back to the board of directors, have maybe a coach that they use, because internal coaches, again, have the company, their interest, is foremost and so forth. So I think you need a different perspective and so forth. So I think maybe you have a couple of coaches, one that's paid by the company and one that you may have to employ on your own.
So this board of directors, how important is it that it's formalized, or is it just, hey, I got 4 buddies that I call when I'm facing an obstacle?
It's the latter. It's the 4 buddies. Just make sure that the buddies sort of know you from a different perspective. Maybe they know you a little bit longer. Maybe somebody you met in the executive MBA program. Maybe it's a person who runs another wealth management company, et cetera, et cetera. And you sort of not giving away secrets, but you're bouncing things off. That's the key. I want to bounce a couple of things off from you. What are your thoughts? Not even necessarily your advice. What are your thoughts, insights?
What am I not thinking of?
Absolutely.
Right.
What questions am I not asking?
That's great.
Yeah.
Very helpful. All right. And so for those that are saying, okay, well, that is a good fit and I need executive coaching, how much does it cost? I mean, is it super expensive? What can I expect there?
It's super expensive.
Okay.
No. So like anything in life, particularly with professionals and so forth, I mean, lawyers' fees, different ranges, but the number can be anywhere between, say, $150 to $650 per hour. Now that's individual, and that sort of, you can Google that and that's what you'll see. But I think in general, what you want to determine is what are your objectives? And then does this person have the expertise or the experience in order to help you? So if you're talking about getting executive coaching for the CEO, et cetera, then clearly you're gonna reach out to coaches that have that experience. Maybe they've done it before. Maybe that's their specialty. You're gonna pay more per hour.
Sure.
Whereas if you're looking at working at the VP level or director level and so forth, now you probably pay a little less because either that's what coaches want, that's what they want. Those are the types of people they want to work with at that level, and so forth. So it does varies on whether we're going to do individual coaching or whether you're going to bring someone in and have them do like a session for your entire organization or your entire leadership team. And then clearly, paying for things like the assessment, that would be different too, based on the assessment.
Okay. So you kind of start with that initial conversation, what's the need, and then talk about compensation, because it really is tailored to each situation.
It is. And again, some of the plan might be individual, one-on-one. Some of it might be you come in and do something with the organization, et cetera. So again, those hourly rates would then vary.
Makes sense. All right. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right. So Tom, kind of my last question here, I was looking at, the value exchange. We always want to circle back with big question, which is, how does executive coaching shape success, and kind of your experience with that?
So an example that I can give you would be that an organization would determine that some help is needed within their organization. And they don't necessarily want to do the formal route of an MBA program or that type of thing. And they may not have resources, particularly human resources, that can help from a training and that perspective. So the idea would be going out and interviewing coaches that could come into their organization and do an analysis on, well, what are you trying to improve here? Is it retention? Is it profitability? Is it people are leaving, et cetera? Or for some reason, personalities are clashing. So once you determine why you want to coach, now go out and interview them and find out, you need someone who has an expertise in each one of those? Can you get sort of a general manager type executive coach who's been around, has a number of clients, and they can give you some examples of where they were successful, and you could try those things out from that perspective. So, and then clearly you want to have some metrics. You want to have some timelines to determine how successful that relationship is working.
So if I hired you as an executive coach, would we quantify those goals, or, how clear do we need to be so that we know kind of when did we accomplish it? Or
yeah, and again, some of the goals could be somewhat fuzzy. I think the example I gave you earlier, where someone says, "Well, this person's somewhat abrasive." Okay, so what do you mean by that? Well, they're abrasive, and they have people that are unhappy. We may have some turnover as a result. No one can work for her. So okay, so what can we use as a measurement? So if we work with her, or if I work with her, now it's a question of how much time are we going to give where she improves. Do we look at retention? Do we do some form of assessment where people saying what should she stop doing, start doing, et cetera, that can show you that you're making progress and how much more time do you need in order for that to happen. So,
oh, that's great. So for those that want to hire an executive coach, maybe they want to hire you, can you kind of tell them how do they get hold of you? How do they find you?
So so I'm on LinkedIn, and that's probably the best way to contact me is through my LinkedIn profile. And then the next steps would be to have a chat, a Zoom chat or a phone chat, and talk about what your needs are, and then what I can actually bring to the table and offer you from a standpoint of value.
It's great. Tom, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Value Exchange Podcast. Look forward to seeing you in upcoming episodes.